Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Wexelblatt from Adhd, and I'm very happy to be speaking with Dr. Marcy Caldwell today about parenting with ADHD when you have ADHD yourself. And I'm going to have Dr. Caldwell introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcy Caldwell. I'm a clinical psychologist and owner and director of the Center for ADHD, as well as the founder of Adhd.org, which is a blog and digital resource for adults with ADHD.
So thank you so much for joining us today. So what I wanted to speak to you about today was something that I've seen increasingly over the past 2 years, particularly with parents who have ADHD themselves who are active on parenting social media. And what that is parents being drawn to, parenting approaches that have risen in popularity in the past few years that are not evidence informed and lean heavily into what I call parental accommodation, where parents are altering their behavior basically to keep the child placated and avoid any blow ups or tantrums or meltdowns. I have a sense of why this appeals to them, but I wanted to ask you, do you find this in your work, and what do we do to help parents parent in a way that will be more helpful for their child with ADHD? Because as many parents have shared with me, particularly in private conversations, when they've tried some of these parenting approaches, they found that it really created chaos in their house. And some of them even went so far to say, it was almost traumatizing for me how dysregulated my child became. Um, so what can parents do, one, when you find this happening, and how do you help them?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think there's a lot that plays into this, right? And I think so. I'm going to name a couple, but I'm going to dig into one in particular. So I think that part of what can play into this is that it can be really hard for ADHD brains to maintain boundaries and
Mhm.
consistency, right? That at their core, ADHD brains really struggle with consistency,
Mhm.
and so it, with that lack of consistency, it can be very easy for kids to kind of degrade and wear down those boundaries. And so that's a piece of it, that it's hard for an ADHD brain to kind of maintain that kind of consistency necessary for that more kind of middle ground parenting. And then we also have the whatever parenting style the parents grew up with, right? Which often was kind of the opposite, was like
Mhm.
too many rules and too inflexible. And so sometimes we have parents who are kind of responding and reacting and wanting to go as far away from that as possible. But I think the biggest thing that I often really see is the sensitivity to rejection, and kind of the struggle with emotional regulation that ADHD brains are so prone to, right? That 70% of adults with ADHD show a impairing amount, which I don't like that word, but enough emotional dysregulation that it impacts their life, right?
Mhm.
And that so they're feeling the feelings in very big ways, and their systems are kind of being impacted by emotion in very big ways. And that is particularly true for rejection. And what relationship means more to us than a relationship with our kids, right? Very few
Mhm.
relationships mean more than that. And so when we are rejected, or when we're afraid that we're going to get rejected, right? It doesn't even have to be "I hate you, mom," or
Mhm.
"you're the worst," an actual stated rejection. It could just be a fear of, "Oh, they're going to hate me. Oh, they're gonna get mad at me. They're not gonna like that," right? Then even just that fear hits the ADHD nervous system with as much force as the actual thing. And that emotion is really, really hard to handle. So ADHD brains feel emotions larger and more often. And in order to kind of not feel that, I think a lot of parents will go the route of least resistance,
Mm,
right? Will go to, you know what, I'll just deal with it, right? Like I'll just make another meal, or I'll just clean up the room for them, or right,
mm.
like I can just do the thing, so that I don't have to feel that. And of course that's not conscious, right? Like if that were conscious, people would probably do things differently. Um, but it's this kind of felt sense of I don't want to I can't handle that feeling that feels so unbearable to me, that rejection of this most important relationship. And so I'll just do the thing for them. Um, and of course, we know in the long run that that results in more rejection down the road, and that results in, more contentious relationships down the road. But in the short run, it makes the child happy. And it makes the child, or at least doesn't make the child unhappy, I should say.
Right.
Um, and so it doesn't disrupt the relationship in the moment. And it's a really hard thing for an ADHD brain to kind of hold that in the long run this is going to be better, even though in the short run I'm going to have to handle this discomfort of this feeling.
I wanted to just make a few points about that, and thank you so much. That really clarified things. When parents say things to me like, well, I can't follow through because I have ADHD myself. What I say to them is, I want you to shift your mindset away from thinking about this as a character flaw on your behalf. And I share with them, Dr. Barkley's phrase that, ADHD is a condition of inconsistent performance.
Mhm.
So of course you're going to have difficulty with being consistent. That is part of ADHD. That is part of how your brain works, right? It is not a character flaw on your behalf at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
And because we want them to be accepting of that. I think in terms of what you were saying, about this parenting piece, that makes complete sense to me. Why somebody coming along and saying, "Hey, here's a way for your kids to remain happy with you," in the moment, why that's so appealing. And particularly when we're not thinking about, what the long-term outcome is here. And I think the other piece of that for me is, in hearing you talk about this was, it took me a while, I think, to appreciate the depth of that rejection sensitivity that parents with ADHD experience. Um, I think, I had a sense of it, but I didn't have a sense of how deep it is, and how much it actually stings. Um, so hearing you put it in that context, I think really helps people who might not be familiar with this, or particularly a co-parent or a partner, understand that this is not just about oh, I want him to like me. This goes really to your core. I mean, it stings that deeply.
Yeah, in fact, when we look at MRI scans of a
Mm,
brain, even just thinking about possible rejection for an ADHD brain, we actually see the pain centers of the brain light up. So there's
wow.
actual physical pain, like there. This is a very real thing. This is not just I'm too sensitive. This is not just I just want them to like me. This is a very real sensory experience that's happening for folks. And that's not to say then, therefore we need to just make the kids happy. Um, but it is something that we really need to be thinking through, right? And thinking through, okay, well, how are we going to get through that? And how are we going to help parents get through that? Because it's not super sustainable if we're just gonna like power through.
Mhm.
It's not a power throughable sensation. And so we need to put in additional supports, and that can be medication, that can be therapy, that can be ADHD informed emotion regulation training. There are lots of ways to do that. Um, but it's not just a kind of grit your teeth and get through it. They really need to kind of offer additional supports for it.
And I assume in most cases multiple supports, not just one.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Right. Okay.
Whenever we can piece in as many as possible,
Right.
for sure, it's going to be useful.
That makes sense. Well, this is so
Yeah.
incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Where can we find you online?
So I'm on Instagram and Facebook on adept_org, or I'm on www.adept.org.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.